If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss any of our stories. And I mean it when I say you are not going to want to miss what happened to me. My name is Teresa, and for 3,652 days, I have lived with a truth that felt like a shard of glass lodged in my throat. Every morning I'd wake up, and for a blissful second, I'd forget. Then the weight of it would settle back into my bones, a familiar poison. The secret belonged to my brother-in-law, Judge Marcus Thorne, a man lauded in our city for his integrity, his charity work, his perfect, handsome family. But I knew him as something else. I knew him as the man who was driving the car. 10 years ago, a hit-and-run driver left my sister Clara in a wheelchair. That driver was Marcus, her husband, the man who held her hand in the hospital, who oversaw the modifications to their house, who hosted fundraisers for spinal cord injury research. He built an entire life, a career, a saintly reputation, on the ruins of the life he had destroyed. And I, the silent accomplice, let him. I did it for Clara. I convinced myself I was protecting her. Her physical recovery was brutal, but her emotional state was a delicate web of spun glass. Marcus was her rock, her hero. The truth, I reasoned, wouldn't just break her heart. It would shatter the very foundations of her reality. It would be a second, more catastrophic accident. So I said nothing. I smiled at family dinners. I listened to my parents praise Marcus for his devotion. I held the glass shard in my throat and learned to speak around it. That brings me to today. The air in courtroom 4B is stale, thick with the scent of old paper, cheap polish, and quiet desperation. It's a grand, intimidating room, all dark wood paneling and soaring ceilings, designed to make you feel small. And sitting on the elevated bench, draped in black robes, Marcus looks like a god. He's presiding over the case of Daniel Petrova, a young mechanic accused of a hit-and-run. The parallels are so sickeningly precise, it feels like a nightmare I can't wake from. A rainy night, a pedestrian struck in a crosswalk, a driver who fled. The prosecution's case is thin, built on a grainy surveillance video and a witness who seemed more confused than certain. But Marcus has guided it, subtly, expertly, toward a guilty verdict. Beside me, Clara shifts in her wheelchair, the quiet whir of the motor a sound as familiar to me now as her own breathing. She leans in, her voice a warm whisper against my ear. "This must be so hard on him," she says, her gaze fixed on her husband with pure, unadulterated admiration. Reliving it all. He's been so tense this whole week. He pours so much of himself into these cases. I want to scream. I want to vomit. Instead, I just nod, a jerky, puppet-like motion. Reliving it, he's not reliving it. He's reenacting it. He's sanitizing his own soul by sacrificing an innocent man on the altar of his reputation. Daniel Petrova, a kid with frightened eyes and a pregnant wife weeping in the front row, is about to pay for Marcus's sins. The jury has been sequestered for 2 hours, but everyone knows what's coming. The foreman is already avoiding the defendant's gaze. I look at Marcus, really look at him. He's the image of judicial solemnity, his brow furrowed, his mouth a firm line of concentration. He catches my eye for a fraction of a second, and there's nothing there. No recognition of the monstrous irony, just the cool, blank confidence of a man who has never, not once, paid a price for anything. A bailiff enters the room, hands a note to the clerk, and the whispers die down. The jury has reached a verdict. This is it. This is the moment. The gears of the state are grinding toward a conclusion that will ruin a man's life, a family's future. To stop it, all I have to do is open my mouth. To save this stranger, I have to detonate a bomb in the center of my own life, obliterating my sister, my family, and the fragile peace I sold my soul to protect. Clara reaches over and squeezes my hand, her touch meant to be comforting. It feels like a branding iron. The courtroom door opens, and the jury files in, their faces grim. The shard of glass in my throat is finally, after 10 long years, starting to move. The foreman, a paunchy man in a cheap suit, couldn't look at Daniel Petrova. That's how you knew. In movies, the jury is a stone-faced monolith. In reality, they are 12 people who just want to go home, and their guilt or certainty radiates off them in waves. This man's guilt was a palpable thing. He was about to condemn a man he wasn't sure about, and his entire body screamed it. He handed the slip of paper to the bailiff, who carried it with the funereal gravity of a holy text to the bench. Marcus took it. He didn't look at it right away. He let the moment hang in the air, a master of theatrical tension. He adjusted his robes. He took a sip of water. He was performing the role of Judge Thorne, a man wrestling with the weight of justice. I saw it for what it was, the sadistic little flourish of a predator playing with his food. My own world had shrunk to the space between my hammering heart and the back of my throat. Beside me, Clara's hand was still on mine, her skin warm, her grip trusting. She thought we were sharing a moment of solemn empathy for her wonderful husband. The hypocrisy was a physical force, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. And in that suffocating pressure, the past came rushing back, not as a memory, but as a living thing. 10 years ago, it was November, and the rain was relentless, turning the city streets into slick, black mirrors. Clara and I had been at a late movie. She was giddy, newly engaged to Marcus, this rising star in the district attorney's office, from a family with a name that opened doors all over the state. I was her maid of honor, and we were debating color palettes for the wedding. She wanted lavender. I thought it looked like a funeral. We were laughing about it as we stepped into the crosswalk on 5th Street. I was a step ahead of her. I remember the sound first, not a screech of tires. There was no time for that. Just a horrifying percussive thud, a sound of metal meeting flesh and bone. I turned, and she was gone, erased from the spot where she had just been standing. Then I saw her, a crumpled shape 20 feet down the road. The car, a dark sedan, big, expensive, paused for a single damning second before its red taillights vanished into the rain-streaked night. I don't remember screaming, but people who were there said I did. I remember the smell of wet asphalt, the flashing lights that seemed to take an eternity to arrive, and the terrifying, unnatural angle of Clara's leg. In the hospital, the world became a blur of antiseptic smells, hushed doctors, and the squeak of soft-soled shoes on linoleum. The diagnosis was delivered in a quiet, sterile room: a severe spinal cord injury, T10 incomplete. It was a torrent of medical jargon that all boiled down to one simple, brutal fact: my sister would never walk again. Marcus arrived like a conquering hero, returning to a devastated city. He was a pillar of strength. He dealt with the doctors. He fielded calls from our hysterical parents. He held Clara's hand, murmuring promises that they would get through this. He was perfect, too perfect. While everyone else was falling apart, he was a monument of calm control. He hired a private investigator to supplement the police investigation, a grand gesture that my parents praised as a sign of his devotion. But the investigation went nowhere. The grainy footage was too poor to get a plate. No witnesses could agree on the make or model. It was just another tragic, unsolved urban crime. The confession came 3 weeks later. It wasn't dramatic. There was no tearful breakdown. I had gone to their apartment to pick up some of Clara's things. Marcus was there, drinking scotch in the dark. He looked hollowed out. His perfect composure finally cracked. I asked him if he was okay. It was a stupid, automatic question, and he just said it, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. It was me, Teresa. I was driving. I thought I had misheard. It was an auditory hallucination brought on by grief and exhaustion. But then he laid it all out, the words falling like ice chips into the silent room. He'd been at a fundraiser, had a few too many drinks. He was arguing with his father on the phone, a stupid fight about his career path. He was distracted. He looked down to change the music, and when he looked up there was a shape in the road. He panicked. The first rule of his world, the world of the Thorns, was to control the narrative. An accident, a DUI, involving a rising star prosecutor, would be a career-ending scandal. Stopping, he explained, was never an option, so he drove. He went home, parked the car in his private garage, and the next day had his mechanic, a man whose family had worked for the Thorns for generations, fix the dented front bumper and shattered headlight, paying cash and filing a false police report about a parking garage hit and run. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was informing me of a fact. He was laying out the terms of my silence. He told me, telling Clara would be a kindness to no one. It would destroy her. It would destroy your parents' faith in me. It would destroy everything we're trying to build. You're the only one who knows, Teresa. And for her sake, it has to stay that way. It wasn't a plea. It was a command, cloaked in the language of compassion. It was the most masterful act of manipulation I had ever witnessed. He made my silence an act of love, my speaking out an act of cruelty. And like a fool, I believed him. I became the keeper of his secret, the guardian of a lie that was poisoning my entire family from the inside out. The first crack in my resolve appeared about 5 years later. I was helping Clara organize her closet. Tucked away in the back, in a dusty box, was a framed photo of Marcus's old car, a custom-built Auden Sententia Vice. It was his pride and joy, a graduation gift from his father. He'd sold it shortly after the accident, claiming the memories were too painful. The photo was taken at a car show. The camera had focused on the front, highlighting the unique star-patterned crystalline headlights, a special edition feature, and my blood ran cold. I had my own box, hidden deep in my own closet. The night of the accident, after the ambulance had taken Clara away, I had walked the scene like a ghost. The police were there, but in the chaos, I saw something glittering by the curb, washed clean by the rain. A shard of thick, heavy glass, curved with a peculiar starburst etching on the inside. I don't know why I picked it up. A morbid souvenir, a desperate need to hold a piece of the moment that had changed everything. I put it in my pocket and forgot about it until Marcus confessed. Even then I'd buried it. It was too horrible to contemplate. But now, looking at the picture of his car, I knew. The shard in my box was a piece of Marcus's headlight. It was the only piece of physical evidence in the world, and I had it. For years that knowledge did nothing but deepen my prison. What could I do? The trail was cold. His mechanic would be loyal. It would be my word, and a 10-year-old piece of glass, against the sterling reputation of a sitting judge. They would paint me as a jealous, unstable sister-in-law. They would destroy me. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself. It was about stability. It was about Clara. That became my mantra, the lie I repeated to myself in the dark. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. Because now, watching him on that bench, I realized it was never about protecting Clara. It was about my own cowardice. I had been afraid of the fallout, of the drama, of the pain. I had chosen the illusion of peace over the messy, devastating truth, and the cost of my cowardice was sitting right there in the defendant's box. Daniel Petrova. This wasn't just a case for Marcus. This was a ritual cleansing. By convicting this innocent man for a crime so similar to his own, he could finally, in his own twisted mind, achieve absolution. He could prove that the system he represented worked, even if he himself was its greatest failure. He was using the full power of the state to launder his conscience. The catalyst wasn't a single thought, but a horrifying confluence of images. Clara's trusting face, the tears on the face of Daniel Petrova's wife, the smug, unearned serenity on Marcus's, and the memory of that star-etched shard of glass sitting in a box in my closet. The jury filed back into the box. The foreman stood, the slip of paper in his trembling hand. He cleared his throat. On the charge of vehicular assault in the first degree, we, the jury, find the defendant. He paused, and in that pause 10 years of silence, of complicity, of self-deception, curdled into a cold, hard resolve. My protection of Clara had been a cage for both of us. The only way to set either of us free was to burn it to the ground. I had to do something. Not tomorrow, not in an hour, now, before that single awful word, guilty, could be spoken. I let go of Clara's hand. Her skin suddenly felt foreign. I stood up. The movement was small, but in the pin-drop silence of the courtroom, it was a seismic event. Every head turned. Clara looked up at me, her expression a mixture of confusion and alarm. "Tess? What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice sharp. The judge, Marcus, my brother-in-law, the man who had ruined her life and built a throne upon his lies, looked down at me. For the first time, his mask of judicial calm slipped. I saw a flicker of something else. Annoyance, and beneath that a flash of pure, cold fear. He knew. He didn't know how, but he knew that the one person in the world who could destroy him was finally, after a decade, standing up. My heart was a wild drum against my ribs, but my voice, when it came out, was shockingly clear. It cut through the thick, expectant silence of the room. "Your Honor," I said, my words aimed not at the bench, but directly at the man sitting on it. "I have evidence. I have evidence that pertains to this case, and to an old one." The courtroom erupted into a cacophony of confused murmurs. The foreman froze, his mouth agape. The prosecutor, a young, ambitious woman Marcus had mentored, shot to her feet, objecting, but Marcus just stared at me, his face pale, the blood draining from it. The charade was over. The silent, accommodating sister-in-law was gone. In her place stood a woman who had nothing left to lose, and a truth that was about to burn his whole world down. It wasn't about revenge, I had told myself for years. But as I looked at his terrified face, a cold, satisfying thought bloomed in my mind. Maybe, just maybe, it was a little bit about revenge too, and it was just getting started. The moments after my outburst were a blur of controlled chaos. A court officer was at my side instantly, his hand resting on his hip, his voice a low, firm murmur, telling me to sit down. The prosecutor was shouting about contempt of court, but I didn't see any of them. I only saw Marcus. He banged his gavel, a sharp, cracking sound that was a beat too late, a fraction too panicked. "Order," he yelled, his voice strained. "Counsel will approach the bench." Clara was pulling on my sleeve, her face a mask of horrified embarrassment. "Teresa, for God's sake, sit down. What do you think you're doing?" Her words were a frantic hiss. I looked down at her, and for the first time in 10 years, I saw past the fragile patient I was supposed to protect. I saw a woman cocooned in a lie, a comfortable lie I had helped build. Pity, and a terrible, fierce love warred inside me. "I'm saving a life, Clara," I whispered back. "Maybe more than one." At the bench, the public defender, a young, perpetually exhausted woman named Genevieve Rousseau, was looking at me with a bewildered but desperate hope. The prosecutor was sputtering about sanctions. Marcus kept his back to the courtroom, creating a shield of authority, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. I knew what he was doing. He was trying to shut it down, to bury it, to paint me as a hysterical woman having a public breakdown. He would recommend a psych evaluation, express deep family concern, and get me out of his courtroom before the damage became irreparable. I wouldn't let him. I knew I had one shot. I couldn't just have an outburst. I needed a plan, and it formed in my mind with the cold, swift clarity that only comes after a decade of repressed fury. I needed an ally. I needed a weapon, and I needed to get out of this room. As the bailiff began to gently but firmly escort me toward the exit, I locked eyes with Genevieve Rousseau. I mouthed 2 words to her. "My house. Tonight." Then I added a third, the one that would ensure she came. Evidence. Being escorted out of the courtroom was the most humiliating and liberating experience of my life. My parents, who had come for the verdict to support Marcus, were in the gallery, their faces aghast. I could feel their judgment, their shame, boring into my back. Clara refused to look at me as I was led past her, her face set in a stony mask of betrayal. In their eyes, I had just committed the ultimate sin. I had created a scene. I had embarrassed the family. The truth of the matter was irrelevant. Appearances in our family were everything. I spent the next few hours in a daze. I went home and made coffee. I didn't drink. I paced my small apartment, the silence a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. The weight of my decision was crushing. This wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about my mother, who worshipped him, my father, who saw Marcus's success as a reflection of his own good judgment, and Clara. Oh, Clara. I was about to take a wrecking ball to the painstaking reconstruction of her life. Was it my right? This was the question that had paralyzed me for a decade. Was a bitter truth better than a sweet lie? The debate was no longer academic. By standing up in that courtroom, I had lit the fuse. There was no going back. My phone buzzed incessantly. A string of texts from my mother. What on earth was that? You have humiliated this entire family. Call me immediately. Then one from my father, more direct, more threatening. Marcus is a judge. You have no idea the trouble you are in. You need to fix this. And finally, one from Clara. Each word a tiny, poisoned dart. I don't know who you are anymore. How could you do that to him? To me, I ignored them all. They were the voices from the old world. The world where I was the quiet, accommodating Teresa. That person was gone. I walked to my closet and pulled down a dusty shoebox from the top shelf. Inside, nestled in cotton balls, was the shard of glass. It felt heavy in my palm, cold and sharp. For 10 years it had been a symbol of my guilt, my silence. Now it was a key. My second piece of evidence was more abstract, but just as powerful: my memory. I sat down and began to write. I wrote down every detail of Marcus's confession, the time, the place, the brand of scotch he was drinking, the exact words he used. A kindness to no one. Control the narrative. I wrote down the details of the Auden Sententia V8, the custom headlights, the name of the mechanic who had worked for his family for 30 years, a man named Hector. I was building an arsenal. At 8 o'clock, my doorbell rang. It was Genevieve Rousseau. She looked even more tired than she had in court. Her cheap blazer rumpled, dark circles under her eyes. She was clutching a worn leather briefcase to her chest, like a shield. "This had better be good," she said, her voice flat. "Because your little stunt today could have gotten me disbarred, and my client sent to prison for 20 years. My brother-in-law is Judge Marcus Thorne," I began. "I know who he is." She cut me off. "What I want to know is why you decided to torpedo my case in the middle of a verdict reading." I took a breath and laid it all out. The story of my sister's accident, the dark sedan, the rain, the confession. I told her about the car, the custom headlights, the cover-up with the mechanic. Her expression shifted from hostile skepticism to guarded interest. Lawyers hear a lot of wild stories. But then I opened the shoebox and placed the shard of glass on the coffee table between us. She picked it up, holding it to the light. "A piece of a headlight," she said, unimpressed. "It could be from any car. It's from an Auden Sententia V8, I said. "A 2012 model. They only made a few hundred of them. The headlights were made of German crystal and had a starburst etching on the inside. Like that." Her eyes widened slightly. This was specific. This was verifiable. "And you've had this for 10 years. "Yes." "Why now, Teresa?" she asked. Her voice softer now. "Why, after all this time, did you stay silent?" The question felt like a physical blow. It was the question I had asked myself 1,000 times. Because he convinced me that telling the truth would destroy my sister, and I was afraid he was right. I looked her in the eye, and I was a coward. I chose to protect my family's comfort over what was right. I watched your client, Daniel Petrova, in that courtroom today, and I saw a ghost. I saw the person the world blamed, while the real monster got away with it. I can't live with that anymore. It's not about revenge, but I can't let him do it again." Genevieve was silent for a long time, turning the glass shard over and over in her fingers. She was a public defender. Her entire career was a battle against the powerful, the connected, the Marcus Thorns of the world. She saw firsthand how the system was weighted, how money and influence could bend the scales of justice. She was seeing a chance, a 1 in a million chance, to rebalance them. "Okay," she said, finally, her voice firm. "Let's say I believe you. A 10-year-old confession and a piece of glass aren't enough to overturn a verdict, let alone accuse a sitting judge. It's hearsay. It's circumstantial. Marcus's lawyers would tear you to shreds on the stand." "I know," I said. "That's why we don't go after the old case. Not yet. We go after this one." My mind was racing, connecting dots that had been scattered for years. Marcus isn't just a judge in this case. He's a witness in his own mind. He's projecting his own guilt onto Daniel Petrova. He's been steering the prosecution. You said it yourself. The evidence is thin. So why is he so sure Daniel is guilty? Genevieve leaned forward, the exhaustion in her eyes replaced by a hunter's gleam. He's made a few questionable rulings on evidence. He allowed the eyewitness testimony even after the witness contradicted himself in a preliminary hearing. He disallowed my motion to present evidence of another vehicle, a dark-colored sedan, that was seen speeding in the area 5 minutes after the accident. A dark sedan. I repeated, the words tasting like ash. He's not just covering his tracks from 10 years ago. He's creating a new narrative, with a new villain. If he can convict Daniel Petrova for this crime, it reinforces the idea that these things just happen, that it's random, that people like Daniel are the culprits. It validates his own escape. We spent the next 4 hours, huddled in my apartment, which had transformed from a lonely refuge into a war room. We needed more than my story. We needed leverage. We needed to connect Marcus to the new case, to prove he had a personal stake in the outcome that went beyond judicial duty. "The mechanic," Genevieve said suddenly. "Hector. You said he's worked for the Thorn family for years. If Marcus got away with it once, maybe he's not as careful as he thinks. A man like that, a man who believes he's untouchable, gets sloppy." It was a long shot. Hector was loyal. His family's livelihood depended on the Thorns' patronage. But he was also a man with a conscience. Maybe after 10 years, the guilt had festered. Our plan began to take shape, a delicate, dangerous strategy. It wasn't about a dramatic courtroom confession anymore. That was for the movies. This was about creating a crack in Marcus's perfect facade, a crack so deep he would have no choice but to destroy himself trying to patch it. The first step was to get the verdict thrown out. Genevieve would file an emergency motion for a mistrial, citing judicial misconduct. The basis would be my testimony, not about the old accident, but about Marcus's personal, obsessive interest in this specific case, framing it as a psychological bias stemming from his family's own tragedy. It was a weak argument legally, but its purpose wasn't to win. Its purpose was to put Marcus on notice, to let him know that I was coming for him and I was no longer playing by his rules. The second step was for me. I had to find Hector. I had to get him to talk. It was the riskiest part of the plan. A direct confrontation could backfire, sending him running straight to Marcus. I had to be smarter than that. I had to use the family's greatest weapon, their reputation, their sense of propriety, against them. As Genevieve left my apartment in the early hours of the morning, the first hint of gray light was creeping over the city. I felt a strange sense of calm. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by a powerful, righteous anger. For 10 years I had been a pawn in Marcus's game. Now I was finally playing my own. I looked at my phone. Dozens of missed calls and angry texts. I scrolled to my father's last message. "You need to fix this." A cold smile touched my lips. Oh, I was going to fix it. I was going to fix it all. The following morning, the city felt different. The familiar streets, the buildings, the people, they were all the same, but I was seeing them through new eyes. I wasn't just Teresa, the quiet librarian, Clara's sister. I was a saboteur, a woman with a secret that could unravel the tightly woven fabric of power and influence that ran this city. The fear was a cold knot in my stomach, but the plan I had forged with Genevieve was a warm, steadying force. It was a shield and a sword. The first move belonged to Genevieve. At 9 a.m. sharp, she filed the motion for a mistrial. She didn't file it with the court clerk. She filed it directly with the office of the presiding judge of the Superior Court, along with a sealed affidavit from me. The affidavit was a carefully constructed document. It detailed my relationship to Judge Thorne. It described the trauma of my sister's accident. And it alleged, with pointed but legally cautious language, that Judge Thorne's conduct during the Petrova trial suggested a profound and prejudicial bias, an obsession with securing a conviction that compromised the defendant's right to a fair trial. It mentioned his unusual evidentiary rulings. It mentioned his tense personal demeanor. It did not, however, mention the confession. It did not mention the shard of glass. That was the ace we were holding back. The motion was a warning shot, not the killing blow. The purpose was to create a procedural nightmare for Marcus. A claim of judicial misconduct, filed by a family member, was a bomb. It would force an internal review. It would bring scrutiny he could not control. It would, most importantly, halt the sentencing of Daniel Petrova. It bought us time. I didn't have to wait long for the fallout. At 10:15 a.m., my phone rang. It was Marcus. His number flashed on the screen, and my hand trembled as I answered. I expected him to scream, but his voice was eerily calm, a low, controlled purr that was far more terrifying than any rage. "Teresa," he said, the single word dripping with condescension, "you've made a very, very big mistake." "Have I?" I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. I was in my apartment, standing by the window, watching the city move below me. It felt like I was in a separate reality. "I'm with your parents right now," he said. The threat was implicit. He was with his allies, shoring up his defenses. "They're worried about you. We're all worried about you." This public display, this motion, it's the sign of a person who is not well, a person who is lashing out. He was already spinning the narrative, painting me as unstable as hysterical. It was his go-to move. "I'm perfectly well, Marcus," I said, my voice cold. "I just have a newfound appreciation for the truth." There was a pause. I could hear him breathing. "You have no idea what you're messing with," he hissed, the silkiness of his voice fraying at the edges. "I am a judge. I will have you sanctioned. I will have your friend, that pathetic public defender, disbarred. I will destroy you. You already destroyed my sister." I shot back. "You just convinced her it was an act of God instead of an act of cowardice. The difference is, I know the truth, and it's not going to stay a secret much longer." I hung up. My heart was pounding. It was the first time I had ever directly challenged him. For 10 years he had held all the power, but now with one motion, the ground beneath his feet had started to shift. He was panicked. A panicked man makes mistakes. My next step was to find Hector, the mechanic. I knew his garage, Hector's Premium Auto, a clean, unassuming shop in an industrial part of town that serviced the city's elite. The Thornes had been sending their cars there for decades. Showing up and demanding he confess was a fool's errand. His loyalty to the Thornes was a financial necessity. So I decided to use that. I drove to the most expensive luxury car dealership in the state. I walked in and told the slick, smiling salesman that I wanted to test drive the new Audi Eterna, the latest model from the same manufacturer as Marcus's old car. It was a ridiculous, beautiful machine that cost more than my apartment. For an hour, I played the part of a wealthy, discerning buyer. At the end of the test drive, I told the salesman I was impressed, but I had a concern. My personal mechanic is the only one I trust, I said, my tone conveying a lifetime of casual wealth. His name is Hector Garza. I believe he's familiar with your vehicles. Before I make a purchase of this magnitude, I need him to look it over. Could you arrange for the car to be sent to his shop for an independent inspection? I'll cover all the costs. Of course. The salesman, seeing a massive commission on the line, couldn't have been more accommodating. It was an unusual request, but for a $250,000 sale, he would have delivered the car to the moon. An hour later, I was at Hector's garage, not as Teresa, the angry sister-in-law, but as the associate of a major client. The Audina Turna was already on a lift when I arrived, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Hector was a man in his late 60s, with kind eyes, calloused hands, and a weary slump to his shoulders. He greeted me respectfully, assuming I was with the dealership. "It's a beautiful car," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "The engineering is top-notch." "It is," I said, walking around the vehicle. "It reminds me of an older model, a Sententia V8. A friend of the family used to have one, a man named Marcus Thorne." Hector's face went still. His eyes flickered away from mine, a barely perceptible shift, but I saw it. He busied himself, checking the tire pressure. "I might have worked on one of those years ago," he said, his voice non-committal. "A long time ago. I remember it had the most unusual headlights." I continued, my voice conversational, crystalline, with a starburst pattern inside. "They must have been incredibly expensive, and fragile. I bet if one of those broke, it would be a nightmare to replace. You'd have to special order it from Germany. There would be a paper trail, invoices, shipping manifests." He stopped what he was doing and stood up straight, finally looking at me. The friendly mechanic was gone. In his place was a man with a haunted look in his eyes. He knew who I was now. He was putting it all together. My name, the mention of Marcus, the talk of headlights. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice low. 10 years ago, a car hit my sister and drove away," I said, my voice equally quiet. "The car was a dark sedan. It had a broken headlight. The police never found it, but I did. I found a piece of it." He flinched, a small, involuntary movement. I pressed on. "I know Marcus came to you the next day. I know he paid you in cash to replace the bumper and the headlight, and to keep your mouth shut. I know you filed a false damage report for him. That's insurance fraud, Hector. That's a felony. All a good lawyer would have to do is subpoena the import records for Auden Sententia parts from that year. It wouldn't be hard to find a single shipment of a right-side crystalline headlight sent to this city, to this garage, that was never billed to an insurance company." I was bluffing, mostly. The logistics of finding a 10-year-old parts manifest would be a nightmare, but he didn't know that. He was a mechanic, not a lawyer. I was planting the seed of doubt, of fear. He looked around his garage, at the expensive tools, the clean bays, the business he had spent a lifetime building. He said no one was hurt badly, he whispered, the words sounding weak and pathetic even to him. He said the person was fine. He said it was just a fender bender, and he panicked. "He lied," I said, the words sharp and cruel. "He left my sister on the side of the road, unable to feel her legs. She's in a wheelchair, Hector. She has been for 10 years, every single day." The color drained from his face. The haunted look in his eyes morphed into one of genuine horror. This, I realized, was the key. Marcus had sanitized the story for him, too. Hector wasn't a monster. He was a man who had made a terrible choice, based on a lie, a choice he had been living with ever since. "I have 2 kids in college," he said, his voice cracking. "This place, it's all I have. The Thorns, they would ruin me." "He's ruining an innocent man's life right now," I said. "A young mechanic, just like you once were. His name is Daniel Petrova. Marcus is the judge. He's about to send him to prison to cover up what you and he did. Is your comfort worth that man's freedom? Is it worth my sister's life?" I let the question hang in the air. I had given him a choice. He could stick with Marcus, the man who had lied to him and used him, and risk losing everything when the truth inevitably came out. Or he could help me. he could help himself. I took out a card with Genevieve's number on it and placed it on his workbench. This is the number for Daniel Petrova's lawyer. She can arrange for an immunity deal in exchange for your testimony. You have 24 hours to call her. After that, this conversation never happened, and she will be subpoenaing your financial records and parts invoices for the last 15 years. It's your choice, Hector. Be a pawn for a guilty man, or be a witness for an innocent one. I turned and walked out of the garage, leaving him standing there, a ghost in his own life. I didn't know if he would call, but as I got into my car, I saw him pick up the card. The silent takeover was in motion. Marcus thought the battle would be fought with lawyers and judges. He was wrong. It was being fought in the quiet, dusty corners of his own life, with the people who held his darkest secrets, and they were starting to talk. The 24 hours after my visit to Hector's garage were the longest of my life. Every buzz of my phone made my stomach clench. I was suspended between hope and despair. Had I pushed too hard, would he call Marcus and tell him everything, allowing my brother-in-law to get ahead of the threat, to bury Hector and his testimony under a mountain of legal intimidation? During this agonizing wait, the family pressure campaign escalated from a frantic flurry of texts to a full-blown psychological assault. My mother left tearful, pleading voicemails. My father left cold, angry ones. They were a duet of guilt and threats. But the main attack came from Marcus, and it was far more insidious. He arranged a family dinner. It was framed as an intervention, a loving attempt to bring Teresa back into the fold. It was of course a trap, an ambush. I knew it, but I also knew I had to go. To refuse would be to cede the field, to let them paint me as irrational and unwilling to communicate. I had to walk into the lion's den, not to fight, but to observe, to see the fault lines and weaknesses for myself. The dinner was at my parents' house, the home I grew up in. The air was thick with the smell of my mother's roast chicken, a scent that used to mean comfort and safety. Now it just smelled like a meticulously set stage. My parents, Marcus, and Clara were all there, arranged in the living room like a tribunal. The moment I walked in, the conversation stopped. 4 pairs of eyes fixed on me. It felt like walking in front of a firing squad. Clara was the first to speak, her voice trembling with a mixture of hurt and anger. She was positioned directly beside Marcus, his hand resting possessively on the back of her wheelchair. He was using her as a shield, a symbol of the happy life I was threatening to destroy. "Tess, how could you?" she began, her eyes welling with tears. That scene in the courtroom, it was the most humiliating moment of my life. Everyone was staring. Mrs. Gable from the charity board called Mom to ask if you were having some sort of breakdown. "I'm not having a breakdown, Clara," I said, keeping my voice level. "Then what do you call it?" My father boomed from his armchair, his face flushed. "You've publicly attacked your brother-in-law, a respected judge. You've filed a frivolous motion based on God knows what. You are jeopardizing this entire family's reputation." Family reputation. It was always about that. Not about truth, not about justice, about the pristine, unblemished image of the Thorne-Harris clan. It wasn't about what was right. It was about what looked right. Marcus remained silent, playing the part of the magnanimous victim. He let them do the dirty work, his expression a carefully crafted mask of pained concern. He would nod sympathetically when Clara spoke. He would put a comforting hand on my mother's arm when she started to cry. It was a masterful performance. "I have my reasons," I said simply, directing my words to Clara. "What reasons?" she demanded. "What possible reason could you have to try and ruin the man who has done nothing but love and support me since the accident? He is my rock, Teresa. He is the reason I have a life. And you're trying to tear him down out of what? Jealousy?" The word hung in the air. Jealousy. It was the simplest, cruelest explanation, and the one they had all clearly decided upon. I was the lonely, unmarried sister, jealous of Clara's perfect husband and perfect life. It was a narrative so lazy, so insulting, it almost took my breath away. "This isn't about jealousy," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Then what is it about? My mother chimed in, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. Marcus has been like a son to us. He's been a better son than our own daughter, it seems. You should be grateful for everything he's done for this family. That was it. That was the line. The casual, thoughtless cruelty of it. I looked from my mother's tear-streaked face, to my father's angry one, to Clara's heartbroken one. They weren't a family, they were a cult, and Marcus was their leader. They had built their entire emotional world around the myth of Saint Marcus, the heroic husband. They were so invested in the lie that they were willing to sacrifice me, their own daughter, their own sister, to protect it. This was the family exodus. It wasn't them leaving me, it was me finally, irrevocably, leaving them. The bonds of love and obligation that had held me silent for a decade dissolved in that moment, replaced by a cold, heartbreaking clarity. I was alone, and it was better this way. I looked at Marcus. He was watching me, a faint, triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He thought he had won. He thought this display of family unity would crush me, force me to retreat, to apologize, to retract my statement and crawl back into my box. And that's when my phone vibrated in my pocket. A single text message. From Genevieve Rousseau. It said one word. Done. Hector had called. He had agreed to testify. He was in her office right now, giving a sworn videotaped deposition. The ace was no longer in my hand. It was on the table. A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a general who knows the tide of the war has just turned. The shift in my demeanor was so abrupt, it caught them all off guard. The victim they were all so busy browbeating was suddenly gone. "You're right," I said. My voice calm and clear. The room fell silent. "You're all right. I've been selfish. I haven't been thinking about the family." Marcus's smirk widened. My parents exchanged a look of relief. Clara's expression softened, hope dawning in her eyes. They thought I was surrendering. "I'm sorry," I continued, looking directly at Clara. "I'm sorry for what's about to happen. I tried to protect you from it for 10 years. But I see now that what I was protecting wasn't you. It was this." I gestured around the room, at the comfortable furniture, at my shell-shocked parents, at the man sitting next to her. "This illusion. And it's over." I turned to Marcus. "Check your email, Marcus," I said. "I think you have a message from a lawyer named Genevieve Rousseau. It should have a video attachment. From an old friend of yours. A man named Hector." The color drained from his face. The mask of calm shattered into a million pieces, replaced by raw, naked panic. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking. He saw the email notification. He saw the subject line, "Sworn Deposition of Hector Garza." His eyes, when they met mine, were wide with terror. He knew. It was over. The family exodus I had been dreading was happening, but not in the way I had imagined. It was a silent internal schism. Clara watched the exchange, her brow furrowed in confusion. She saw her husband's terror, his composure utterly gone, and she looked at me, at my newfound chilling calm. The seed of doubt, the one I had planted with my outburst in court, had finally, in the face of Marcus's undeniable panic, begun to sprout. She was beginning her own exodus, not from the family, but from the lie that had been her prison for a decade. The room was silent, but a world had just ended within it. The confrontation didn't happen in a packed courtroom. There was no dramatic "I object" moment. The end of Marcus Thorne's career came quietly, antiseptically, in a beige-walled conference room at the Office of Judicial Conduct. It was, in its own way, far more damning. Public spectacle can be spun. A quiet, professional dismantling cannot. Genevieve's motion, now bolstered by Hector's videotaped deposition, had triggered an immediate high-priority investigation. Marcus was forced to recuse himself from the Petrova case, and a senior judge immediately declared a mistrial. Daniel Petrova was released on his own recognizance, the charges against him soon to be dropped. That was the first victory, a quiet but profound one. An innocent man was going home to his wife, but the war for the larger truth was just beginning. Marcus was summoned to the hearing. He brought his lawyer, a silver-haired man who exuded an aura of expensive old money power. I was there with Genevieve. And to everyone's surprise, Clara was there too. She had called me the night after the disastrous family dinner, her voice small and broken. "I need to know," was all she said. I had told her to come. She needed to hear it from the source. The hearing was presided over by a panel of 3 judges. They were stoic, impassive, their faces revealing nothing. Hector's deposition was the centerpiece. We watched it on a large screen. We saw the weary mechanic, his face etched with a decade of guilt, calmly and precisely recount the events of that night. He described the late-night call from a panicked Marcus Thorne. He described the damage to the Auden Sententia V8, the dented front bumper, the shattered right-side crystalline headlight. He described being paid a thick envelope of cash and being told to create a false work order for a parking garage scrape. He confessed to filing a fraudulent insurance claim to cover the story. He even produced the original, falsified work order he had kept, for some reason, all these years. Maybe as insurance, maybe as a reminder. When the video ended, the room was silent. Marcus was ashen. His lawyer was scribbling furiously on a legal pad, but he knew, we all knew, that the damage was catastrophic. Then, it was my turn. Genevieve had me recount my story. I spoke about the night of the accident. I told them about Marcus's confession in his apartment. I repeated the phrases he had used, the manipulative, self-serving logic he had employed to secure my silence. A kindness to no one. Control the narrative. Marcus's lawyer tried to object, calling it hearsay, but the head of the panel, a stern-faced older woman, waved him off. "This is not a court of law, counsel. This is an inquiry. We are establishing a pattern of behavior. Please continue, Miss Harris." Finally, I placed the small shoebox on the conference table. I took out the shard of glass and pushed it into the center of the table. "This is a piece of the headlight from the car that hit my sister," I said. "I picked it up at the scene that night. I've kept it for 10 years. Marcus's lawyer scoffed. "A piece of glass. It proves nothing." "On its own, you're right," Genevieve said, stepping forward. "But a forensic analysis will confirm it is German crystal, consistent with the material used in the Auden Sententia, and more importantly," she slid a document across the table. "We have the shipping manifest from the Auden parts distributor for North America. It shows a single custom crystalline headlight assembly for a 2012 Sententia V8. Right side was shipped to Hector's Premium Auto 10 years ago, 3 days after the accident. There is no corresponding insurance claim. There is no official work order. It's a ghost part, a part to fix a ghost accident." It was over. The chain of evidence was complete. An unbreakable link from the hit and run, to Hector, to Marcus. Marcus didn't even try to fight. He just sat there, a hollowed-out man, the black robes of his profession, suddenly a costume that no longer fit. He stared at his hands, defeated. But the final, most devastating blow didn't come from the evidence. It came from Clara. She had been silent the entire time, her face a pale, unreadable mask. Now she wheeled herself forward slightly. All eyes turned to her. She looked at her husband, the man she had loved, admired, and defended. Her voice, when she spoke, was not angry or hysterical. It was eerily calm, filled with a terrible, quiet grief. "The night you came to the hospital," she said, her words dropping like stones into the silent room. "You brought me a small bouquet of freesias. You said you were sorry you were late, that you'd been held up at a fundraiser." She paused, her gaze unwavering. "You told me you loved me. You held my hand, and I couldn't feel it. I couldn't feel your hand, and you knew why. You knew why, and you just kept holding it." She didn't need to say anything else. In that one, simple, devastating observation, She had articulated the true nature of his monstrosity. It wasn't just the accident. It wasn't just the lie. It was the decade of intimate daily deception. It was the performance of love, of support, of shared trauma, all while knowing he was the author of her pain. Marcus finally looked up at her, his eyes pleading. But there was no mercy in her face, just the vast, empty space where her love for him used to be. The new reality had set in. The judges thanked us for our testimony. Marcus and his lawyer were asked to stay. For us, it was over. I wheeled my sister out of that beige conference room, and for the first time in 10 years, we were walking out into the sunlight together, unburdened by the weight of the secret that had defined both of our lives. The world I had been so afraid to destroy was gone, but the one that was beginning to replace it felt, for the first time, real. The aftermath wasn't a celebration. There were no victory parties. Justice, when it finally arrives after a long delay, doesn't feel like a triumph. It feels like a debt being paid, a ledger being balanced. It's quiet and solemn and deeply, profoundly exhausting. Marcus resigned his judgeship immediately before the panel could issue its recommendation to have him removed. The district attorney's office, facing a public relations nightmare and irrefutable evidence, opened a criminal investigation. He was charged with perjury, obstruction of justice for the cover-up, and thanks to a legal loophole regarding the statute of limitations on crimes revealed through new evidence, he was also charged with the original felony hit and run. His perfect life, so meticulously constructed, had been completely and utterly demolished by a single 10-year-old truth. The Thorne family name, once a key that unlocked any door in the city, was now synonymous with scandal and disgrace. My parents didn't speak to me for months. In their eyes, I was the villain, the one who had brought shame upon the family. They couldn't, or wouldn't, see Marcus as the perpetrator. They could only see me as the destroyer. I had violated the primary rule of our family. You do not air the dirty laundry. You certainly don't hand it over to the authorities. I have a feeling they will never forgive me, and I have to accept that. I have to accept that I chose justice over their approval, and in their world, that is an unforgivable sin. The most important relationship, the one I had sacrificed everything to protect, was the one with Clara. It was shattered, and we had to pick up the pieces and see if we could build something new. It was a slow, painful process. For weeks, she was lost in a fog of grief and betrayal. She had to mourn a man who was still alive. She had to mourn a marriage that had been a lie. She had to mourn the decade she had spent admiring a monster. We didn't talk about Marcus. We talked about small things. Books. The weather. Old childhood memories. I would go to her house, the house he was no longer in, and we would just sit in silence sometimes. It was a comfortable silence, no longer poisoned by unspoken truths. One day, about 2 months after the hearing, she turned to me. "Were you ever going to tell me?" she asked. It was the question that had been hanging between us. I was honest. "I don't know," I said. "I was a coward. I told myself I was protecting you, but I was protecting myself from this, from hurting you. I am so sorry, Clara. For all of it. For my silence." She was quiet for a long time. Then she reached out and took my hand. This time, I didn't flinch. "You didn't do this, Tess," she said, her voice firm. "He did. My anger belongs to him. My grief belongs to him. What I have for you is gratitude. You set me free. It's a horrible, painful freedom, but it's real. Thank you." That was the beginning of a new sisterhood, one forged not in shared blood, but in a shared, hard-won truth. She filed for divorce. She started seeing a therapist. She started talking about going back to school to finish the art history degree she had abandoned after the accident. She was rebuilding her world on a new foundation, one that was entirely her own. And what about me? I'm still the quiet librarian. I still live in my small apartment. On the surface, not much has changed. But on the inside, everything has. The shard of glass in my throat is gone. The weight on my shoulders has lifted. I can breathe again. I learned that family isn't an unbreakable bond that demands blind loyalty. Sometimes, family is a choice. Sometimes, true loyalty isn't silence. It's speaking a truth so painful it burns everything to the ground, so that something new and honest can grow in its place. So I want to ask you, what would you have done? Would you have kept the secret to protect your sister's happiness? Or would you have spoken the truth? No matter the cost. It's a question without an easy answer. For 10 years, I chose silence. I chose the illusion of peace. And in the end, all it did was prolong the pain and allow a guilty man to thrive. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about rectifying a cosmic injustice. It was about giving my sister back her truth. And in the process, reclaiming my own. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever been faced with a choice between a comfortable lie and a devastating truth, let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about the moments that change everything. We all have them. The secret is knowing what to do when they arrive.